Hello, 7th grade. It's Mrs. Brown. Just wanted to put this instructional video together to help you a little bit with adverbs. We haven't talked too much about these because I feel like basically most of you probably understand adverbs, but I want to go over the basics with you and just review them, get them kind of in your head. So then when we get to the things that are a little bit more difficult, you can refer back to these basics if you need to. So just as a review, adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. The thing that makes adverbs a little bit tricky is not so much when they're modifying verbs, because they tell real basic things about verbs, like how or when or in what manner something is done. So whenever it modifies the verb, it's pretty easy and pretty obvious. But really what makes adverbs tricky is when they modify adjectives and when they modify other adverbs. So remember, adjectives describe nouns and adverbs, again, describe verbs. So it can get a little bit tricky when the adverb is modifying an adjective or another adverb. But most of the time, probably 80% of the time an adverb is used, it's modifying the verb. The specific times that you use an adverb to modify an adjective or another adverb is really with that number 3 on the board, which is, number 4 on the verb, degree. So how much or how little you have of something. So an adjective is a description, right, of a noun or a person, place, thing, object. So when you have an adjective, say little is an adjective modifying a noun, an adverb can be used to tell you the degree of the adjective. In other words, the degree of littleness, if you will. So if you use an adjective like very, which tells you degree, it tells you how much or how little, which is what degree is, then you could say, the puppy was very little. So not just little, but how little are we talking? Are we talking extremely little, moderately little? That's what adverbs do for adjectives. And they actually do the same thing for adverbs. So you could say that a person ran slowly, and slowly is a basic adverb that's describing the verb ran. It tells how they ran, the manner in which they ran. But if you said they ran very slowly, then you have an adverb, very, which is modifying another adverb, slowly, which is telling you the amount or degree of slowliness, if you will, that the person ran. So again, most of the time you are looking at adverbs, they're modifying the verb. If you're not sure what to put and you have to kind of do an educated guess, then guess that it's modifying the verb, because that's what most adverbs do. But if you see a word like to, T-O-O, or very, then you know that those words are telling you how much or to how much of a degree, how much or how little of another thing that you have. And so they really are there to emphasize a verb that's a word that's a descriptor, like another adjective or adverb. The other ones that are a little bit really, we don't see them very often, but they are adverbs of affirmation at the bottom of my list, and negation. So words that are affirmation would be words like indeed or yes, where you're affirming or agreeing with a position. That's affirmation. Negation are negative words, and they're no, not, and never. So whenever you see the words no, N-O, not, or never in a sentence, those are adverbs of negation. If you see the word yes, or positively, or indeed, something like that, where you know that the person, if you heard that voice of that person, it's like they're affirming what someone is saying. So if you said, oh wow, it's really hot outside, and I said indeed, then I am affirming you. That's affirmation. I am agreeing with you. I am reacting in a positive way to what you said. So that kind of a word is an adverb of affirmation. Okay, so I'm just going to flip my little board around here, my little office at home, and I'm just trying to give you a little instruction from here. And I want to talk to you about interrogative adverbs and adverbial nouns. This is a lesson that you did, the last lesson that you did in the adverb chapter. Let me just move this thing. There we go. And I think that there may have been a few questions about adverbial nouns. Adverbs, just so you know, an adverb is one of the least used parts of speech. I mean, other than an interjection or conjunction, something small like that, we probably use conjunctions more than we use adverbs. Adverbs are very, very specific. They only apply to verbs. And by and large, they tell us more about the verb. There are those couple of exceptions, like I just said, where they modify other adverbs and adjectives, but by and large, they modify verbs. And we just don't use them that often in our language. So there are two different kinds of adverbs that I want to point out that are in your book and that you did a little exercise with. One of them is the interrogative adverbs, which are the ones that ask the questions. The words why, when, and where, how, those are all interrogative adverbs. So if you had a sentence like, when did your mother come home? And that's a question, right? So that starts that question out with the word when. If you turn that question into a statement, my mother came home when. Now granted, it's used to create a question mark. You don't know the answer to that. But if you flip it into a statement, you can see where it has to do with the action of coming home or arriving. And so it is modifying the verb, my mother came home when. If you take a question like, why do you like carrots? And you turn that into a statement, I like carrots, why? It's an explanation of the verb like. Even though it doesn't tell you the answer, the word itself is actually truly an adverb because it has to do with the verb. Where did you leave your coat? If you turn that around and make it a statement, you would say something to the effect of, you left your coat where? You left your coat where? Left where? So where is the location? Now we don't know where is because it's actually used to ask that question. But if you can just step aside from it a little bit and look at it, you can see that it has to do with the verb left. So when you're looking at grammar, you have to decide when you look at some of these words, let's say you were diagramming this and you weren't really sure what part of speech the word where is. Then you have to think, what does that have to do with? Of all of the other words in the sentence, does it have to do with the noun? Does it have to do with the verb? What does it actually modify or describe or enhance or give me more information about? And the answer to that is the verb. So if you can remember the why, when, where, and how, those are interrogative adverbs. We use them all the time. We do associate them with questions. We know interrogative comes from the word interrogate, which means to ask questions. So you might just have to memorize those 4 adverbs. Now the adverbial nouns are a little bit confusing. I know some kids were asking me on our last Zoom about adverbial nouns. Those are words that are typically nouns, but the way they're being used in the sentence, having to do with the verb or describing the verb, turns the word into an adverb. So adverbial nouns tell us things like time, distance, measure, or direction about the verb. So if you just looked at the word and you just put it up on a board and you say, what part of speech is this? An adverbial noun, it looks like a noun. It looks like a thing, but because it's being used in a particular sentence to describe the verb and give us more information about the verb, it's really an adverb. And it's a noun functioning as an adverb, so it's an adverbial noun. It would be called an adverb. If I asked you to label every part of speech in a sentence and you had one of these words being used as an adverbial noun, you would call it an adverb. So for instance, examples would be words like years, miles, degrees, north, south, east, west. Those are all examples of adverbial nouns. So if you said, I traveled miles yesterday, I traveled miles yesterday, you're using that word miles, which is typically a thing, would be a noun. You're using it as an adverb, and you're telling distance. So you're saying how far you traveled. Okay, so anything that has to do with amount or degree having to do with the verb is going to be an adverb. Okay, so it's a little bit confusing, but not terribly so, because even though your head is trying to tell you, well, the word miles, that's a thing, that's going to be a noun. When it applies to the verb, it's not a noun anymore. It's an adverb. Another example of that would be that example I like to give, birds fly south in the winter. Birds fly south. Well, that really, even though south is a direction, and we think of a direction as a thing, in that particular sentence, it tells where the birds fly. So it's not a direction so much as it is a location, and it tells where. And if it answers that question, where, then it's an adverb. So those are the ones that are a little bit on the tricky side. And I wanted to review those before I go on to the next lesson, which is just troublesome adverbs, the ones that we tend to mix up. And I'll touch on that in the next video. Bye, guys.